Ikhwan al-Safa divides pleasures into two, physical pleasures and inner pleasures. Then physical pleasures are divided by the Ikhwan al-Safa into two kinds, namely natural pleasures and animal pleasures. Natural pleasures is the pleasure felt by the soul when eating and drinking. It can be felt by humans, animals, and plants, while the animal pleasures are, for example, like sexual pleasure and getting appreciation from others. This kind of pleasure cannot be felt by plants, can only be felt by humans and animals. And second, the inner pleasure. Inner pleasures are pleasures obtained by the soul. This means suffering is also felt only by the soul, not the body. Inner pleasures are divided into two, rational pleasures and spiritual pleasures. Rational pleasures are pleasures that the soul gains in exploring knowledge and understanding the nature of things. These rational pleasures relates to the states of a person's soul. Either his nature is vicious or good. If the nature of his soul is virtuous, he is always in trouble, which means his soul is in a state of ignorance. In this case, knowledge becomes very important to achieve the rational pleasures, especially moral education. If human actions are vicious, their soul is really sick and in pain. Immorality comes from a soul that is shackled in ignorance, so that it determines one's deeds. This intellectual pleasure depends on the perfection of the soul, and the perfection of the soul depends on knowledge. The more one's knowledge increases, the more the perfection of the soul increases, so that the pleasure also increases. Therefore, knowledge in this context becomes a source of pleasure because by knowledge humans will understand their nature. In addition, according to Ikhwan al-Safa, knowledge will make people calm with what they have. The second inner pleasure is spiritual pleasure. There are two kinds of spiritual pleasure that the soul can obtain. First, the pleasures that the soul derives from separation from the body. This confirms that Ikhwan al-Safa regards the body as a shackle for the soul in achieving eternal pleasure. Like Plato, Ikhwan al-Safa highlights the contrast between the human body and the human soul by identifying the former as a dark, corruptible and mortal substance, and the latter as a luminous, incorruptible and immortal principle. Furthermore, Ikhwan al-Safa maintains that all the pleasures obtained through the body are only temporal, and essentially humans cannot find and feel the true happiness in temporary things. They can only find the true happiness in something that is absolute and eternal. Second, the pleasure that the soul gets along with the body. There are four kinds of examples. First, the pleasure that is felt when one apprehends the nature of things. Second, the pleasure derived from the firm belief. Third, the pleasure derived from virtues and good habits. Fourth, the pleasure that is obtained when one reflects noble and good things. Quotes know that al-kufr in Arabic means al-ghitha, to be covered. That is something that happens to the soul within the body. Such is because of the soul that continues to be in ignorance and his substance is lost from himself. They don't know that besides this body there is another substance that moves it. That is the pure soul from which actions arise. According to Ikhwan al-Safa, the pleasures that come from material things are artificial and not real, because for Ikhwan al-Safa such pleasures are only temporal and depend on the mortalities. Pleasure, for instance, due to the delicious food, depends on the food that can be eaten and the state of the body. If the body is sick, one will be difficult to feel the pleasure of delicious food, and even the food becomes unpalatable. In other words, if there is no the modality, there is no pleasure. For Ikhwan al-Safa, the more we manage to break away from attachment to the material world, the happier we feel. Important to keep in mind that the dichotomy between the physical pleasures and inner pleasures doesn't indicate the difference of their worth, one in the world and one in the hereafter. As we pointed out that the spiritual pleasures, it as intellectual pleasures which are obtained when one knows the nature of things or simply knowing, is not the same as the pleasures one derives from food. The first is foundational and the second is peripheral. In fact, from our knowledge we can understand which foods are healthy for our body and which are not. And we also know how to cook healthy foods. It can be said that the pleasure obtained from knowledge encompasses the pleasures of others. This means that inner pleasures are substantial and eternal pleasures, and vice versa, physical pleasures are accidental and temporal because they are only related to temporary interests. They assert that pleasure and pain can occur simultaneously. Quotes know that Man at all times is never free of pain and pleasure, both physical and spiritual in its various forms. For example, a lover when seeing his beloved, even though she betrays him, remains happy and feels good to look at her, so that he doesn't see his beloved's betrayal and his pain. You should remember that the factor why this secret group arose was the social, political, and especially religious and moral chaos that was happening at that time. For Ikhwan al-Safa, the social chaos and moral degradation that occurred to the Muslims at that time was caused by the ignorance of the people themselves. According to Ikhwan al-Safa, ignorance leads to demoralization. In the end, the wrong views encourage one to do bad deeds. Therefore, in the effort to educate the common people, Ikhwan al-Safa tried to eliminate at least two things: ignorance and moral degradation. These two things are intertwined. Ignorance causes moral degradation, and moral degradation can lead to ignorance. Thus, in order to achieve pleasure, one has to get rid of one's own ignorance. According to Ikhwan al-Safa, education and intellectual exercise are the keys. The more we know true and good things, the happier our lives will be. The second way is to improve morals. As we have stated before that if a human's character is good, his soul is always safe from deceitful enjoyment. But if his character is bad and vicious, he will always be in trouble. This kind of soul is in suffering and ignorance. In addition to achieve pleasure, humans must also do good and be good. To be good, humans must possess moral virtues. In this case, humans must be able to get rid of their lower soul and purify the soul in order to be angelic soul through spiritual exercise that is usually performed by the Sufis. What do you think you can rule the world and actually improve it? I don't believe that it can be done. The world is sacred. You cannot improve it. Ultimately, you can only change yourselves. See you.